Hello everyone. Welcome to the Chicago Club Travel Show. We're so happy you decided to join us today because, as usual, we've got a great show. It's November, and you know what November means. It's Veterans Day, and I'm all dressed, ready to celebrate the entire month of November. Some of you may remember last year we did a great Veterans Day show when we went to San Diego, and we knew we couldn't improve upon that at all. So today, we're revisiting that show with everything from Camp Pendleton to Fort Rosecrans Cemetery to the USS Midway and even Cabrillo Monument and downtown San Diego. So it may look familiar to you, but we knew we couldn't do any better than this. So today's a revisiting, a renewal, but it's all about celebrating our veterans. On behalf of the Chicago Club, on behalf of all the villagers, we thank our veterans, we bless our veterans, and we congratulate you on your service and wish you continued health. So without further ado, let's get on with the show and let's get on with the celebration. Happy Veterans Day. Hello everyone. Welcome to the November Chicago Club Show. We're so happy you joined us today because this is going to be a very special show. It's November, and November is all about our veterans. And the Chicago Club wanted to recognize all of our veterans, but as well as our active military, our current veterans that are still with us, and those that have gone before us. We wanted to do that because we can't be with you today. Those of you that have been with us in the past know the Chicago Club has a huge event every November for our veterans. We do music, we do comedy, we have raffles, we have auctions, we have silent auctions, and our military visits with us in our show and our meeting. We miss them, and we miss them terribly. And every year, believe it or not, we raise nearly $8,000 for our veterans. And we donate it to the local veterans associations. But we can't do that today So we thought, well, gee, how can we do this? How can we still recognize and talk about our veterans? And that's when we expanded the thought to our active military, as well as our current veterans and those that have gone before us. So here we are today. We came to San Diego. Can't think of a more military town than San Diego. And we have an exciting day planned for us. And as always, I have Hoffy with me. And we're standing in a very sacred place. So I'll let him start to share with you where we are today, and join us on this journey to recognize those that have served our country.
Yeah. Thank you, Dorothy, and hello, Chicago Club. We are at this very sacred place, Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery, where our fallen heroes are laid to rest, all the way from the Mexican-American War all the way to the Iraq War. The cemetery is actually full. They do allow some remains still in cremated remains, but there are family members interred here as well. It's a beautiful setting here at Point Loma in San Diego with the ocean. I can't imagine a more beautiful place. In 1934, Fort Rosecrans was named a national cemetery, and it is administered by the Veterans Administration. It was named after General Rosecrans, who was a Union general during the Civil War. This fort first got its name, and we'll take a look later. It's called Ballast Point. It was meant to block and protect San Diego Harbor. Then it became a national cemetery. There are 135 national cemeteries throughout the United States, and there are 45 of them in California alone. Of course, the oldest is Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. There are 101,000 graves in Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. So let's take a look at this beautiful setting. This memorial is the oldest memorial in the Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. This commemorates the Battle of San Pasqual during the Mexican-American War in 1846. This is where more than a dozen United States dragoons lost their lives, and they're buried here. The battle was to the east of San Diego, and it was one of the most significant battles in the Mexican-American War. So you could say it was one of the battles that won California from Mexico. So this is the oldest memorial in the cemetery. And next to it, we have the memorial to the Mormon Battalion. They made the longest military march in U.S. history, over 2,000 miles from Iowa to San Diego in 1846 to 1847 during the war with Mexico. So this is the oldest part of the cemetery.
And we're very excited to be here. When the Chicago Club first planned this trip, we were hoping to be able to visit Camp Pendleton, because as I've said, our show, we're focusing on active military and our veterans. But we really wanted to get into Camp Pendleton, and we really tried. But because of COVID, they wouldn't let any civilians on the base. So the other idea we had was just go stand in front of the gate. But that wasn't going to work because we were pretty sure Homeland Security would come get us. So here we are on the coastline, having a beautiful, beautiful morning on the base in Camp Pendleton. So Bill now is going to give us some information, as Hoppy always does, in history of Camp Pendleton.
Okay. Thank you, Dorothy. Hello, everybody. Hello, Chicago Club. Well, here we are at Camp Pendleton. It's the largest Marine base on the West Coast. There are 42,000 Marines in this amazing, huge camp that goes over 22 miles inland. 27% of the Marines' families live on the base. It turns out that Camp Pendleton has a very interesting history. This is actually part of El Camino Real, where Gaspar de Portola, the Spanish explorer, and Father Junipero Serra came up the coast. They called it Santa Margarita for Saint Margaret. And then, when Mexico broke away from Spain, the governor Pio Pico had a large ranch. This was all a huge ranch. But Pio Pico got in some gambling troubles, and his son-in-law, John Forster, bought it from Pio Pico, and it became a large ranch called Santa Margarita y las Flores. It was a large cattle ranch. Then in, excuse me, in 1882, Richard O'Neill and James Flood bought the ranch from John Forster, and they expanded it into a huge cattle operation. If we could have gotten on the base, we could have seen the original ranch house. There's still an adobe there. But anyway, in 1942, the U.S. military needed a base on the West Coast. So they came to the O'Neill family and they bought this huge area called Camp Pendleton. The O'Neill family still maintained the northern part of the ranch, and that became Mission Viejo, Santa Margarita, and Ladera Ranch, and San Juan Capistrano. But this area was purchased by the military to become this huge base. Now let's take a look at the coastline here. This is the only stretch of open space on the coastline between San Diego and Orange County. And you can see where the military does maneuvers along the bluff. They do amphibious landings here, and you can see the tremendous amount of open space that Camp Pendleton provides. This is an excellent place for amphibious landings. Camp Pendleton played a major role in training Marines for the Vietnam War and the Iraq War and Afghanistan as well. There's an interesting marker here that shows the Las Flores viewpoint. So you can see San Clemente Island is in that direction, Catalina Island is in that direction, and Dana Point is in the distance. Okay, Chicago Club, we're at the beautiful Cabrillo National Monument, and as you know, the Chicago Club goes to a lot of historic areas, historic landmarks, national monuments, locally designated historic districts, national registers. So we have a park ranger with us, Amanda Gossard. She's going to explain the difference between a national park and a national monument. Thank you, Amanda. And I love the, I want to be this. I really want to have the hat. How about, can I buy the hat?
No, it's not for sale.
You got to earn it.
you got to earn it. Yeah,
I love this.
sure.
But anyway, thank you, Amanda. If you could explain that.
No problem. So, hi everybody. My name is Ranger Amanda, and I've been at Cabrillo National Monument for about 12 years. So it's great. I love being a park ranger. I love being in San Diego. Can't think of a better place to be. Behind me, you will see the Old Point Loma Lighthouse. Now, this lighthouse was built in 1855, and it had a short lifespan, decommissioned in 1891. In 1913, President Woodrow Wilson designated the quarter acre around the lighthouse as Cabrillo National Monument. Just basically saving that land, saving that structure, and also commemorating the landing of Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, who was the first European to step foot in what is now the west coast of the United States. Now, the difference between a national monument and a national park is that a national monument is designated via presidential proclamation, and a national park takes an act of Congress to designate. So we are a national monument. We are under the guise of the National Park Service, so that is who runs our organization and manages us. So if you want to turn over here, I will introduce you to our main man, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo. As I said, first European to step foot on what is now the west coast of the United States, and he did this September 12, 1542. And September 28th, 1542. Now, if you look down below, you will see two plaques. And one plaque says that he is a Portuguese explorer, and the other plaque says that he is a Spanish explorer. The reason for this difference in these two plaques is because for a long time we thought that Cabrillo might have been Portuguese. But there was really never any conclusive evidence either way, until 4 years ago, when a researcher who had dedicated her life to researching whether or not Cabrillo was a man of Spain or of Portugal, discovered some court documents where he swore under oath that he was a man of Spain. So we have this shiny new plaque here to designate him as a Spanish explorer.
Okay, so Juan Cabrillo, he actually landed at Ballast Point, which we will take a look at, and he met the natives here, the Kumeyaay natives, and they had been in a battle with other Spanish explorers inland, but he said that they were well-dressed and good-looking people, and he had a good interaction with them. After Cabrillo left San Diego Harbor, and by the way, there's really only 3 really good harbors to my knowledge in California. There's San Diego Harbor, there's the harbor up by Eureka, and San Diego is a fantastic harbor. So Cabrillo took off and he went north, but he had a terrible accident. It's a little bit mysterious how he passed away, but the story says that in the Channel Islands, there was a battle with some of perhaps the Chumash Native Americans. He fell out of the ship or landed on the ship, and he either broke his leg or his arm, but he died of an infection. And I've heard that he's buried, is this right, Amanda, on Catalina Island?
Yeah, it's an island that they called El Capitan.
Yeah.
And it is believed that he is buried somewhere on one of the Channel Islands.
Yeah, he's buried somewhere in one of the Channel Islands. But then the interesting thing was his ship continued to go north, and they believe that his ship, the San Salvador, went 800 miles up the coast and then turned around. I believe that he passed San Francisco Harbor and didn't discover it. But what I find interesting is this was, remember, 1842 and 1843. After Cabrillo leaves, there won't be another explorer until Gaspar de Portola and Father Junipero Serra arrive in 1769. So it took 200 years after exploring it, and remember, Cabrillo named California for the King of Spain. It would take 200 years before we would have more Europeans explore the coast of California. You can see the submarine substation at the bottom there. That's Ballast Point, where Juan Cabrillo actually landed in 1542. And by the way, there's a great beer company, craft beer, called Ballast Point. And then as we move over, you can see how big and beautiful this harbor is. There's the U.S. Naval Air Station North Island, where jets come in and cargo ships come in all the time. And then you can see the skyline of San Diego. San Diego is the second largest city in California. You know, it's famous for its beautiful climate and Balboa Park and the San Diego Zoo. But it's definitely a military town. They call San Diego the Gibraltar of the Pacific because we needed a base on the Pacific coast for the Panama Canal, for the Spanish-American War, for the Philippines, for Guam. So this was a perfect area. Fort Rosecrans was located down there to the left, just beyond Ballast Point. And then the Naval Training Center is on the other side of Shelter Island. That was a naval training center. It is now called Liberty Station. And they've taken these beautiful Spanish colonial buildings and they have museums and shops and stores. Miramar Air Station is north and east. That's another one of the military bases. Military spending is so important to San Diego. By the early 90s, it was still 20% of the economy. So San Diego is quite a town. And Mexico, by the way, is only 20 miles to the south. Tijuana, it's a little hazy today, but Tijuana, Mexico is just to the south. Okay, so this is a good geography lesson here. So if you could come closer here, you can see Point Loma, the end of the peninsula. This is where we are. Juan Cabrillo is believed to have entered San Diego Harbor, and he landed in this little finger of land called Ballast Point. And then he went further in and he met the Native American, Kumeyaw Native Americans who lived in this area. By the way, Richard Henry Dana, who we've talked about before, also landed with his ship, the Pilgrim, and he entered San Diego Bay, but this was 300 years later, and he also traded hides with the Native American Kumeyaw group. Okay.
Welcome to the next stop on our tour today. If you haven't been able to tell, we're at the USS Midway. Have we mentioned San Diego is really important to the Navy, and the Navy's important to San Diego? And this is really where it also begins. This is the #1 attraction in all of San Diego. And so we're very excited to be here today because it is phenomenal. The tour is difficult, so because of COVID, but we're going to tell you about the Midway now because it's such an important landmark and something important in our history. So here we are with Hoffy again, and he's going to lead us through the Midway without having to get off your sofa. Enjoy the tour.
Hi everybody. As Dorothy said, the USS Midway is actually on TripAdvisor the #1 attraction in San Diego, even more than the zoo, which kind of surprised me. Before we look at the Midway, take a look at the skyline of San Diego. As I said before, it's the second largest city in California, and they've really built a lot of beautiful condos and apartment buildings in the downtown area. And I think if you look at some of the architecture, they have a lot of balconies and very interesting articulation instead of just reflective glass. But let's get back to the Midway. You can see the Midway is number 41. It was the 41st aircraft carrier commissioned by the U.S. government, by the Navy. It's also the longest serving aircraft carrier of the 20th century. It was named after the Battle of the Midway, the decisive battle versus the Japanese in World War II. And if you go into the Midway, I really recommend seeing the movie, The Battle of the Midway. It's fascinating how the Navajo code breakers were actually able to tell the U.S. military where the attack would come. But the Midway was not commissioned until after World War II. So it saw a lot of active duty in the Atlantic, but it also had active duty during the Vietnam War and the first Gulf War, the Persian Gulf War. But you can see, the reason it's so interesting, if you look at the flight deck, When you go to the Midway, you meet the veterans who flew the planes. You learn how, with a steam-fired engine, they catapulted these planes in the middle of the ocean. And they had to time it perfectly so that the pitch of the runway was going up when the plane would take off. And the plane had to be at full throttle. So I'm not a military expert, but you don't have to be to enjoy the USS Midway. I recommend going to the flight deck. And the pointer, I'm going to imitate the pointer like this, means that they pull the plug and the plane is catapulted. This is the fabulous USS Midway. Okay, folks, the USS Midway was commissioned in 1945. It was decommissioned in 1992. All of our aircraft carriers now are nuclear powered. If you look across the bay, you can see the USS Reagan, one of the 11. We have 11 aircraft carriers, all nuclear powered. So now if we take a look at the USS Midway, you can get a look at the size of it. The planes were launched off in this direction. They had to go into the prevailing wind, and the amount of aircraft on board is actually really incredible. That's what makes the tour so interesting. You can also go to the captain's deck up top. That's one of the many tours you can take on the Midway. And we can see to the right, we can see the famous statue, the Kiss, and it's a beautiful attraction here in San Diego. Okay, so your head is back. So everybody, this is the Piazza della Familia, which is a beautiful plaza that closed Date Street. San Diego has a really good planning department, and they do a beautiful job with urban design. So look at how you have this very colorful architecture, mixed-use zoning, and it creates a beautiful sense of enclosure. So this is very, very popular, and this is part of Little Italy. Little Italy is doing a really good job providing housing and good food options and shopping. I think Little Italy is one of the best villages in San Diego. San Diego calls itself a city of villages. Have you ever seen a more beautiful pedestrian street? Okay, we are now entering Balboa Park, named for Núñez de Balboa, the Spaniard who so-called discovered the Pacific Ocean. This is Balboa Park, and it is, I think, one of the most beautiful urban parks in America. San Diego, back in the early 1900s, wanted to have an urban park, and they brought in Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park and many famous urban parks. But then they decided to hire a man named Bertram Goodhue. He was a New York architect, and he fell in love with the Spanish colonial architecture. And they had a great World's Fair called the California Panama Exposition to commemorate the opening of the Panama Canal. So here is the California building designed by Bertram Goodhue in 1915. So think about this, these beautiful buildings were to not only have a great exposition, but to commemorate the opening of the Panama Canal. Look at the beautiful tile work. And you can go up on top of the tower. So now we're entering Balboa Park. And if we look to your left, you can see the very ornate Spanish colonial architecture. There are approximately 21 museums here, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And also, remember that it's 1915, and in those days, urban planners believed in having an axial plan. It's called Baroque or axial planning. You want to have a landmark and a long vista line, so you can see the fountain in the background. This is the idea of a formal axis, the way the French would put the Arc de Triomphe, or in Washington, D.C., the way they would put the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Memorial and Capitol Hill. So now we're entering the center part of Balboa Park. You can see the Museum of Modern Art. You can see the Casa del Prado. The word Prado in Spanish means meadow. Here's the statue of the Spanish El Cid, who fought the Muslims and kicked them out of Spain back in the Middle Ages. Here is the Spreckles Pavilion. That's where they play organ music. Now I'm going to make an illegal left turn.
Okay.
So here's the Prado building. You can see Bertram Goodhue used a very, very ornate type of Spanish colonial architecture. He really captured the romantic view of Spain when he built this beautiful exhibition for Panama and California. And there's a very well-rated restaurant, one of the top-rated restaurants. As we pan to the left, you can see the Museum of Modern Art with the statues of famous Spanish artists. Velázquez is one of them, so is Goya. So that's the Museum of Modern Art. Now, as we walk down the Prado, you can see that the architect's plan was a beautiful promenade that goes all the way to the end to the fountain. So we'll walk this way. The architect Bertram Goodhue, by the way, also designed the LA Public Library. And that is a sort of an Art Deco modern style. And I'm going to recommend the book, The Library Book by Susan Orlean. It's a fantastic book about the history of libraries in the United States and the mysterious fire that afflicted the library, I think it was 1993. In 1935, they also brought in some famous architects to design more Spanish colonial buildings just south of here, but we don't have time to see everything. The native architect in San Diego is a man named Irving Gill, G-I-L, and he's a very famous architect, but his style was a little more modernistic. So the fathers of San Diego decided not to use Irving Gill because they thought that his architecture wasn't quite romantic enough and wasn't ornate. It was kind of stripped down modernism. One of the more beautiful buildings we're coming up here on the left. This is the most ornate Spanish colonial style. It's called Churrigueresque. It's named after a Spanish architect named José de Chiquera. And you can see the tremendous detail in this facade. And this type of architecture you can see throughout colonial Mexico, colonial Spain, and it became very popular in Southern California in the 1920s. So this is beautiful. Now let's pan back this way, and you can see the California building. That is the famous California Tower designed by architect Bertram Goodhue. Now we're going to walk this way. And you can see the botanical building where they have a great collection of orchids and tropical plants. Okay. This is, as you might imagine, a very popular walk. So I think Balboa Park is so beautiful because of the tremendous number of museums and ornate architecture, but it's also got a huge number of gardens. So for that reason, the combination of gardens and historic architecture to me, makes it one of the most beautiful urban parks in the United States, maybe the world. This is a National Historic Landmark. Remember the wonderful ranger at the Cabrillo National Monument talked about the various types of designations. This is the highest honor a place can get in the United States. There's only 2,600 of them in the entire country. So Balboa Park has been designated a National Historic Landmark, and it was done in 1977. Okay, so you can see that Old Town is celebrating Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, which is November 1st and November 2nd. It's becoming a really popular holiday, even in Southern California, maybe throughout the world. So you can see the calaveras, the skulls they have there, and the whole idea, they call them Catrinas and Catrines, skeleton dandies, where the skeleton dresses up like they were going to a fancy party. It's kind of a satire on death. You're laughing death in the face. And in Mexico, they go to the gravesite of people who have passed away, and they remember them. And I've done several, let's walk through here. There's an altar. Oh, this is great. There's an ofrenda. So what the Mexican people do is they do an altar, an ofrenda for their family or loved ones so that they remember them. And I've given several tours to San Miguel de Allende for Day of the Dead, and I think that's a beautiful custom. So my wife and I made an ofrenda with my parents and grandparents and several of our friends who've passed away. So let's take a look at this ofrenda here in Old Town, and these are pictures of people who have passed away, and it's kind of a beautiful way to remember them every year, November 1st and November 2nd. All Souls Day and All Saints Day. So this is a beautiful example of an ofrenda. So good for Old Town. So we are at another National Historic Landmark. This beautiful adobe is considered one of the best adobe structures preserved in California. It's called the Estudillo House. This was an aristocratic family, and they preserved their beautiful adobe here. And there's a legend about this house. Helen Hunt Jackson's famous novel, Ramona, supposedly Ramona's wedding happened here at the Estudillo House, but it didn't historically, but people thought it did, so this house became even more famous for a false reason. So this is called La Plaza de Armas, the Plaza of the Arms, and this was the original plaza that was set out by the Spanish explorers, because remember, this is the birthplace of California. San Diego was where Gaspar de Portola and Sierra landed, and this is where they established the first town. So this whole plaza area was set out in the law of the Indies. Notice how it's a lot wider, it's a lot longer than it is wide. They wanted to take the prevailing breezes. And you can see there's some adobe structures around, but there's also some wooden homes, because remember, when we had the Mexican-American War, California became a state in 1850. And what they did, this San Diego town became one of the early cowboy towns of California. So they built a lot of wooden structures around here. But this is the original Plaza de Armas, the original, I'd say, California's first town. Okay, when California became a state in 1850, a lot of the buildings, they were no longer built of adobe, they were built of wood. And this little Johnson house is a good example of what they call Western false front architecture. Notice how we have a facade that goes above the roof to make the house or the store look even bigger. This is typical of Western towns. They call it Western false front architecture. And that happened from 1860 all the way to about 1880. And then you see the two-story hotel with the balcony. That's typical of hotel architecture from the late 1800s. And this is the early American town period. So remember, California was part of Mexico from 1821 to 1850. Okay, this is a place called Bazar del Mundo, which is a little Mexican shopping center that captures the color of Mexican markets. I think Mexican markets are some of the most colorful in the world. And look at the calaveras from Day of the Dead. And remember, the word they use is Catrinas and Catrines. and you dress up like a skeleton with fancy clothes, and it's a satire against death. So here is the beautiful Bazaar del Mundo.
Would you like to try some of our walnuts?
Darn right.
Cinnamon glazed.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, she'll try one. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Oh, here's a good example of a Catrina. Notice you have the skeleton face, but she's dressed up like she's going to a fancy dance. The origin of the Catrina goes back to the 19 teens in Mexico City, and it was a satire against the wealthy class in Mexico. They would dress up a person fancy, but it would be a skeleton. So they have parades in many Mexican towns. Oh, these are cool. Look at these. Oh, here's a, okay, this is good. This is a male one, so this is a Catrine and a Catrina. So you see the Catrina on the left and the Catrina on the right, and I call it skeleton fancy pants. I think that's a good way to remember it. So they've done a beautiful job decorating this place. This is quite a, there's some more Catrinas, beautifully dressed. Oh, that's cool. Are you still filming? So if you look at the ones on the right, they're very, very tall. In San Miguel de Allende, when you get married, you have the Catrina and the Catrina dancing along with you down the street. You also have a burro with tequila and music as you're walking down the street with these wonderful, they're called mojigangas. They're like paper mache figures. So you've got tequila, music, and you've got the famous Catrina and Catrina. That's a pretty cool way to get married, huh, girls? I mean, right in the street. It's super fun. I'm thinking the Day of the Dead is becoming a fashion statement around California, maybe all over Latin America. You can get t-shirts, you can get mugs, and it's crazy. So we could walk around to the left or we're done. Oh, making tortillas, nice. Son de maíz, ¿no?
Sí.
Oh, muy bien.
Y también hay de harina.
Se hincha, ¿no?
Ajá, se infla.
Sí.
Sí. Entonces te va a
Ah, gracias. Oh, I have one more thing. Can you get a picture of this? Or is the light bad? So this is another ofrenda. These are pictures of people who have passed away. And what you do is if this person liked tequila, you would put a tequila bottle. If they like football, you'd put an American football. And do you see the marigolds right there, everybody? The marigold is the flower of Day of the Dead. And the Aztec word is cempasúchil. So the marigolds are everywhere in Mexico this time of year. They're orange flowers, and they're the symbol of Day of the Dead. So remember when the Spanish came into California here in San Diego, there weren't a lot of trees, so to build buildings that would last, they built them out of mud and straw. And these are adobe bricks, and you can see how thick the walls were. They would have to make the walls extra thick to be able to support the roof. Now the advantage of a thick wall is it keeps cool in the summer and warm in the winter. So adobe turns out to be a really good way to go. And what you would do is you would paint it white on the outside with limestone paint, and that would preserve the adobe, because you can imagine when it rained, that adobe would simply wash away, because it was basically earth with straw.
Thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed our tribute to the veterans. here in San Diego County. We really enjoyed sharing this trip with you. And on behalf of the Chicago Club, to our active military and our veterans who are still with us, we thank you for all that you are, for all that you do, and for all that you will continue to do. And for those that are here, we thank you for your service. We wish you peace, and we'll see you again in paradise. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Let's go! Yeah, I hear it. Oh, yeah! Here we go! Now that's what I'm talking about. Yeah! We're gonna start with Army. If you know the words, sing it! Goes like this. Over there as we hit the dusty trail and the caissons go rolling along. In and out, hear them shout, count a bunch right about, and the caissons go rolling along. Then it's high, high heat in the field of artillery. You know it. Loud and strong. For wherever you go, you will always know that the Army goes rolling along. The U.S. Army is rolling along. You're gonna be next. Can you sing it? Do you know the words? 1, 2, 3. Anchors away, my boys. Anchors away. Farewell to college joys. We sail and break of day. Our last night on shore. Around the world, it's U.S. Navy, forever and strong. U.S. Navy, forever and strong. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's the damn U.S. Air Force. You heard it. Here we go. Here we go. Sing it. Air Force, where are you? Nothing will stop the U.S. Air Force. You've come this far. Are you going to get some? Do you know the words? I need you to sing it. 2, 3. From the halls of that's right. To the shores of Tripoli. We will fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First to fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the title of United States Marine, of United States Marine. One more song. Colonel, come on out. This is about America, it's about God, and it's about country. If you know the words, sing it. Colonel. Bless America. the ocean, like with all. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet
I hope you enjoyed the show. Please remember to send a donation to the DAV. Send to Morton Beck, 5464 Paseo del Lago East, Unit A, made out to DAV. Tune in for our next program, December 10th at 7 p.m. on Channel 6.
That's our show for today. We hope you enjoyed it, and it brought back great memories from the last time we were there, and particularly saluting our veterans. And the trip may have looked a little bit familiar to those of you that traveled with us in November, because our bus trip was to San Diego, and we visited a lot of those same destinations. So it was great to see them again, even without being on the bus. And speaking about being on the bus, I have good news for you. The travel committee is at work. We're working very hard to come up with all the trips for 2022. And we're doing a great job. And what's coming up is even more exciting. So stay tuned and always check our website to make sure that you're seeing the latest trips that are posted, because we're pretty proud of what we're doing. But we were very proud of today, and we thank you again for joining. And once again, to all of our veterans, we salute you. Bye-bye.